Hello, fellow Hallicrafters enthusiasts, wherever you are. Today I'd like to show you my latest acquisition. It is a Hallicrafters Model S-20R communication receiver, which was built sometime between 1939 and 1945. This particular model is in absolutely beautiful cosmetic condition. In fact, I would go so far as to call it pristine. And to find a 70-year-old receiver in pristine condition is something that does not happen every day, let me tell you. It's quite rare. I've been collecting, restoring, and occasionally reselling these old shortwave radios for a number of years now, and I've made one important discovery. The critical thing to look for in a potential restoration candidate is simply its cosmetic appearance. What does the finish look like? Is the case dented, scratched, paint missing, stained? Is it rusty? And very, very important is the condition of the front panel and the control labeling. Every control has a label telling exactly what the control does. Very often this labeling is broken, dirty, missing, or just not readable. And if this is the case, it is still possible to restore the receiver, but it's not going to be a lot of fun. First thing we have to do is repaint the case, and matching the factory color exactly is something you're not going to be able to do. And if you're not an expert with a spray can, you're going to get running paint, paint drips, and overspray, none of which look too good. If, however, you are able to paint the cabinet adequately, then you are faced with replacing the control labeling decals. Decals are available for the individual models. They're kind of tricky to replace. They have to be put in exactly the right position the first time. They have to be perfectly straight or perfectly horizontal. And frankly, this kind of work is way too artsy crafty for me to invest any time in nowadays. When I come across a radio that is not in very good to excellent cosmetic condition, I simply pass it by. What is the point in having a beautifully operating receiver that looks like a piece of junk? This S-20R is a perfect example of what I look for in a shortwave radio to restore. The cabinet is in beautiful condition. The finish is very, very nice. No stains, no rust, no dings, no scratches, no missing finish. The front panel is equally nice, and most importantly of all, the control labeling is all sharp and clear. In fact, it looks much as it did the day it left the factory. Here is the left side of the receiver with the ornamental aluminum strip in place. And here is the right side of the receiver with the ornamental aluminum strip in place. And here is a nice close-up of the front panel. All the knobs are original and in very good condition. The control labeling is sharp and clear, and the tuning dials are also in very good condition. And here we have a shot of the rear of the receiver, which is also in very nice condition. And as you can see, there's no rust on the chassis. On the bottom of this receiver, I found quite a surprise. The original factory label, or factory seal, which covers up the holes used to align the receiver. This is a very good thing because it means nobody has been playing around with alignment. Finding this label unbroken also adds greatly to the value of the receiver. I found this little gem at my favorite collectible antique store, Country Antique Fair Mall, the Country Antique Fair Mall in Santa Clarita, Southern California. This is a wonderful place. My wife and I have spent many, many happy hours reviewing a great variety of vintage merchandise, and they are very, very nice people. If you're ever in Southern California, I recommend you check out the Country Antique Fair Mall and see for yourself. I found this receiver in a stall run by a man named Mr. Johnson, who is a senior dealer at Country Antique Fair Mall. Mr. Johnson specializes in vintage technical books, technical magazines, and in vintage electronics of all kinds. There you can find old microphones, old headphones, many kinds of electrical meters, and a variety of other things. And once in a while you can find a shortwave radio. And that's where this radio came from. This radio jumped out at me immediately because the control lettering was so beautiful and the cabinet was so beautiful. I just couldn't resist it. There was a price tag attached to the radio where Mr. Johnson had written, "Radio complete but needs some work," and also the price. And the price was ridiculously low. I'm not even going to tell you. Of course, a radio that looked this good was worthy of any amount of time, effort, and money to do the electrical restoration. And so I took it home. When I got it into the shop, it turned out that the only work it really needed was to restring 2 dial cords and to resolder the lead that goes from the tuning capacitor to the RF amplifier. Less than 1 hour's work, nothing to it. And then the radio received beautifully on all bands. Very sensitive, very selective. I was even able to copy single sideband, which is quite unusual for a radio of this age. The controls are very quiet, didn't even need cleaning. But I decided to go a step further. I replaced the power cord with a 3-conductor cord, and I redid a very sloppy repair someone had done in the past to replace the electrolytic capacitors. Then I was happy with the radio. No reason to recap it. It played fine. Inside this S-20R is a heavy gauge steel chassis which is mounted in a heavy gauge steel case. The whole thing weighs a whopping 27 pounds, and that's why these old veterans are affectionately called boat anchors. They are worthy of the name. I especially like the pre-war styling of the S-20R. It has a very serious look to it, and I think kind of a military look if you compare it to the post-war styling of Hallicrafters receivers like the S-85, which looks like this. A relic like this raises a lot of questions about its history. For instance, who was the first owner? When did he buy it? Why did he buy it? Was he perhaps a radio amateur, or just someone who wanted to get news from around the world? Did a family huddle around this radio every evening to get news of World War II? How many owners has this receiver had? And how could it possibly survive unmolested for 70 years? Was it packed up in storage for some length of time? Another kind of interesting thing to think about is that this receiver represents the level of technology that existed when research began to develop the first atomic bomb. That is really mind-blowing. This receiver is actually a link, historical link, to a past when there were no satellite hookups, no cell phones, and no computers, 70-some years ago. And with my help and the help of others, I hope it can survive unmolested for another 70 years and even further on. The S-20R makes a surprise cameo appearance in a very famous motion picture, Some Like It Hot, starring Marilyn Monroe, Jack Lemmon, and Tony Curtis. I believe he's in the final scene. Well, I'm going to let the S-20R do the sign-off for me, and he is indeed an excellent voice. But first I'm going to thank you all for listening and say see you next time. Okay, my friend, hit it.